The funeral service ended precisely at 3:15 p.m. By 3:40 p.m., while family members and industry peers were still mingling near the fellowship hall drinking lukewarm coffee, my older brother Julian walked up to me. Without saying a single word of comfort, he handed me a heavy cardboard box containing 12 years of my life at Vance Cold Transport Logistics. Inside was my personalized coffee tumbler, a framed photograph with my late father, my desk plaque, and a formal termination letter printed on heavy cream cardstock. "Dad's buried, Victoria," Julian said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "Your services are no longer required at Vance Logistics, effective immediately." I stood there in my black dress, the heavy scent of funeral lilies still clinging to my jacket. I didn't scream. I didn't shed a single tear in front of him. I looked him straight in the eyes and asked a single quiet question. "Did you bother reading the municipal depot lease before you handed me this box?" Julian's smug, arrogant smile flickered for a microsecond, but he quickly brushed it off. "I'm the CEO, Victoria. I don't need to read outdated building leases to run this company." He turned on his heel and walked away to talk to our major investors, convinced he had just established absolute dominance over the family business. I am Victoria Vance. I was 38 years old and had spent 12 years building the operational foundation of Vance Cold Transport Logistics in Atlanta, Georgia. Our father, Marcus Vance, had built the business from a single refrigerated truck into a regional logistics power generating over $12 million annually. I ran operations, fleet compliance, driver schedules, safety certifications, and landlord negotiations. Julian, 3 years older, was in sales. He was charismatic, fast-talking, and excellent at taking prospective clients to golf courses. Dad had named Julian president and transferred 55% of the voting stock to him before passing. I held 35%, and Dad kept 10% until his passing. Julian always resented that Dad trusted my operational discipline more than his flashy sales projections. Whenever Julian wanted to expand aggressively, Dad would look at me and ask, "Victoria, what does the balance sheet say?" Julian hated that question. To him, I was just the cautious younger sister holding him back from glory. What Julian completely overlooked in his rush to eliminate me was the very ground our trucks were parked on. 9 years earlier, Vance Logistics needed a 35,000 square foot refrigerated fleet depot near the Atlanta freight corridor. The company didn't have the liquid capital for a down payment without draining its operating reserves. At the time, I had received a $310,000 inheritance from our maternal grandmother. I added $40,000 of my personal savings and established Apex Commercial Real Estate, LLC. Apex bought the industrial parcel for $1.4 million, secured a commercial mortgage, developed the cold chain depot, and leased it back to Vance Logistics under a favorable long-term contract. Apex Commercial LLC owned the land and the buildings. I owned 100% of Apex Commercial LLC. For 9 years, Apex charged Vance Logistics well below market rent to help the family business grow. Everyone, including Julian, started calling it our depot. Julian treated it as company property. However, paragraph 14 of that lease agreement contained a critical clause. The primary lease expired on December 31st. Vance Logistics held a 5-year extension option at favorable rates, provided the tenant delivered formal written notice of intent to renew by no later than June 15th. Our CFO, Sarah Jenkins, had sent Julian 2 written email reminders in May, warning him that the depot lease extension deadline was June 15th. I was copied on those emails. As the owner of Apex, I explicitly refrained from executing the notice on behalf of the tenant to avoid an illegal conflict of interest. Julian needed to sign and deliver it. Julian was so busy preparing for Dad's passing and planning my firing that he completely ignored the deadline. June 15th passed without any written notice. Dad passed away 3 weeks later. And on the afternoon of Dad's funeral, Julian handed me my termination letter. The lease renewal option had been legally dead for over a month, and Julian had just fired his landlord. 3 days after the funeral, I was sitting in the kitchen of my Atlanta home, sipping coffee and reviewing the legal filings for Apex Commercial Real Estate LLC. On my attorney's advice, Apex issued a formal, routine notice to Vance Cold Transport Logistics. The document was concise. The primary lease for the 35,000 square foot refrigerated fleet depot expires on December 31st. Because the tenant failed to submit written notice of intent to renew by the June 15th deadline, the 5-year renewal option has expired. Apex Commercial LLC is now accepting market rate proposals for the property. My phone rang less than 20 minutes after the letter arrived at corporate headquarters via certified courier. "What the hell is this, Victoria?" Julian roared into the receiver, his voice practically distorting through the speaker. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" "It's a standard commercial notice, Julian," I replied, keeping my voice entirely calm. "Your current lease remains valid through December 31st. You have full access to the facility until then." "You can't do this," he shouted. "Dad built this company. That depot belongs to Vance Logistics." "Dad built the operating business, Julian," I corrected him firmly. "Apex built the facility. And as CEO, it was your sole responsibility to exercise your tenant extension option by June 15th. You received 2 separate email warnings from Sarah Jenkins." "I was busy," he snapped. "I was handling Dad's care and preparing for the corporate transition." "I know," I said softly. "So was I. But I still managed to keep operations running while you were drafting my termination letter." There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the line. "Fix this, Victoria," he ordered, trying to slip back into his authoritative CEO tone. "Sign an addendum, extend the old rate." "Apex is willing to negotiate new lease terms based on current market rates," I replied smoothly. "My commercial broker will send over the updated proposal tomorrow morning. Have a good afternoon, Julian." I hung up before he could reply. The commercial broker's assessment came back the next day. 9 years ago, the area surrounding our Atlanta industrial corridor was mostly empty land. Today, it was a prime logistics hub. Market rent for a specialized 35,000 square foot cold chain facility had skyrocketed. Vance Logistics had been paying $16,500 a month under the old family rate. Apex's broker issued a new 5-year lease proposal at $24,500 a month, triple net, or a temporary 6-month transition lease at $27,000 a month to allow Vance Logistics time to vacate the premises and relocate their operations. Julian went ballistic. He immediately instructed his operations team to search for alternative facilities around the greater Atlanta area. He boasted to senior staff that he would find a bigger, better facility for half the price and leave Apex sitting with an empty building. 2 weeks later, reality hit him like a concrete wall, relocating specialized industrial refrigeration units, backup industrial generators, heavy electrical infrastructure, and 65 commercial transport rigs wasn't like moving a standard office. The cheapest alternative property required over $600,000 in specialized cold storage retrofitting, and municipal permits would take at least 8 months to process. Moving wasn't just expensive, it was logistically impossible before the December 31st deadline. Then, Julian's grand expansion plan suffered a fatal blow. Before Dad died, Julian had been pushing for a $1.5 million commercial loan to acquire 12 new high-efficiency electric transport trucks. During standard underwriting due diligence, the commercial bank requested proof of long-term facility occupancy. When Julian's legal team submitted the current lease, the bank's underwriters immediately noticed the December 31st expiration date and the lack of an executed extension. The bank instantly froze the $1.5 million loan application. They informed Julian in writing that until Vance Logistics secured a signed long-term lease agreement for its operating depot, no capital would be released. Julian didn't just lose his family discount. His entire corporate expansion was grinding to a complete halt. 4 days later, Julian requested an emergency meeting at corporate headquarters. For 12 years, I had entered that executive conference room as Julian's subordinate, taking notes while he presented his sales figures. This time, I walked in flanked by my property attorney and my financial advisor. I didn't sit in my old chair near the door. I sat directly across from Julian at the center of the table. Our CFO, Sarah Jenkins, sat at the head of the table holding a thick manila folder. Julian looked exhausted. The sharp, arrogant posture he had maintained at Dad's funeral was gone, replaced by deep, dark circles under his eyes and a tense, jaw-clenching posture. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Julian began, leaning forward. "Everyone in this room knows what Dad intended. Victoria, you were our VP of Operations. You knew we intended to stay in this facility for another 5 years." My attorney stepped in smoothly. "Intent is irrelevant in commercial property law, Mr. Vance. The lease agreement explicitly required written notice delivered to Apex Commercial LLC by June 15th. That deadline passed 44 days ago." Julian glared at me. "You sat in the same office. You could have drafted the extension yourself." "I owned Apex, Julian," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and unyielding. "I was an employee of Vance Logistics and the sole owner of the landlord entity. For me to execute a lease renewal on behalf of the tenant would have been a severe fiduciary breach. I explicitly warned you. Sarah warned you." Julian turned to Sarah. "You should have pushed harder." Sarah didn't flinch. She opened her folder and slid 2 printed email threads across the table. "May 15th. Formal reminder sent regarding June 15th depot deadline." Sarah read out loud. "June 10th. Urgent follow-up reminder sent. And here is your written reply from June 11th, Julian." Sarah pointed to the bottom of the page. Julian's own reply was printed in bold black ink. "Put this in the post-father transition pile. Victoria handles facility logistics. I have bigger priorities right now." The silence in the conference room was deafening. "You assumed I would clean up after you, just like I did for 12 years, I said, looking straight into his eyes. "You thought having authority meant you didn't need to pay attention to details. And then you handed me a cardboard box outside our father's funeral because you thought eliminating me made you powerful." "Are you doing this out of revenge, Victoria?" Julian asked, his voice cracking slightly. "You're going to destroy Dad's company over a personal grudge?" "I'm not destroying anything," I replied. "Vance Logistics still has full rights to the depot through December 31st. But if you want to remain there beyond this year, you will pay market rates. The family discount left the building when you fired the person providing it." Sarah slid a financial impact sheet toward Julian. "I've run the numbers, Julian. Relocating our fleet to a new facility will cost $600,000 in retrofitting, plus $150,000 in operational downtime. Furthermore, the bank will cancel our $1.5 million expansion loan entirely if we don't have a signed 5-year lease by Friday." Julian looked at the sheet, then at his corporate attorney. His lawyer gave a subtle, grim nod, confirming there was no legal loophole to exploit. Julian took a deep breath, rubbed his face with both hands, and slowly picked up his pen. "What are Apex's terms?" "A 5-year lease at $24,500 a month, triple net, with a 3% annual escalation," my attorney stated. "Upon execution, Apex will sign the landlord waiver required by your commercial bank so your $1.5 million loan can proceed." Without saying another word, Julian signed the new lease agreement. I walked out of Vance Cold Transport Logistics that afternoon with the signed lease in my briefcase. I didn't feel a rush of spiteful triumph. I felt a profound, quiet sense of relief. Vance Logistics didn't go under. The company absorbed the higher rent. The $1.5 million loan cleared 2 weeks later, and 62 drivers and staff kept their jobs. I still own 35% of the operating business, receiving my quarterly dividend checks without ever having to step foot inside Julian's office or fix another one of his overlooked deadlines. 6 months later, I launched my own independent logistics consulting firm in Atlanta. My first 3 corporate clients were regional distributors who knew my operational track record from my time at Vance Logistics. Julian still holds his CEO title. He still runs the company Dad built, but he now pays $24,500 every single month to Apex Commercial LLC. A constant, non-negotiable reminder that real leadership isn't about giving orders or firing people to prove a point. Real authority is about taking responsibility and reading the contracts before you sign away your safety net.